Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This will be the last in the set of the Dendrobium videos, and certainly this particular sea of green here that are in some cases getting a bit out of hand size-wise. Just getting a bit big. Well, that's how they grow. If you're going to have them, then you have to put up the size and accommodate them, which is what I try and do. Now, all of these are on the list to have a proper winter rest, and I'll go over them each in turn because some of them aren't going to get a rest for reasons I'll go over as I get there. But just to refresh, the only way I can do what I would call a proper, drier, brighter, cool winter rest is to get them out of the grow room. If they stay in the grow room, they won't necessarily get as much light as they need, simply because I have bubble wrap and an opaque corrugated plastic roof. And quite honestly, in the UK winters, most of the light doesn't come in through the roof anyway. When I do get sunny days, it comes in through the sides. And because of the nature of the other plants, taking the shade netting off where most of the light comes through, let me just go over it because it changes. At the moment, the sun hits that corner first and drifts this way as the sun moves that way across the sky. That's the path of the sun, yeah? And I don't get any sun until it clears the rooftop. Now, this time of year, that's relatively early in the day. In the winter, the sun is literally there in the sky. It's that low in the sky, and it literally doesn't hit that corner of the grow room till about 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30. And basically effective sunshine is gone by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's what I'm on about, the short days, and that's only when the sun shines, of course. And a lot of our winter days there is no sun. So light levels drop dramatically. Because of the nature of most of my plants in this area, I can't take that layer of shade netting off in the winter. It would be too bright through bare glass for the plants I've got here. So that wouldn't be any good for a bright winter rest. Now, last year for the first time on this end, I actually took all the shade netting off. The shade netting that's on the roof comes off in the winter as well, but as I said, with the bubble wrap and the opaque corrugated plastic roofing, polycarbonate I believe, it's not that bright, and the sun doesn't come in much through the roof anyway. It comes in through the ends because it's just so low in the sky. So that's what I dealt with. But last year, taking all the shade netting off of this end worked really well. I don't know whether you can see it, but that shadow through the shade netting is a huge tree. And in the not too distant future, after midday, the sun will drop behind that tree. Now that's it, it's gone till it comes out that end again. And in the winter, it only comes out that end for about an hour, and it's then gone behind the rooftops. So I can get away, even though in the winter the leaves won't be on that tree. It's such a huge, dense tree, it disperses the sunlight. So I can get away with no shade netting on the end. But again, because the sun doesn't come round this end and do any good, it just wouldn't be bright enough for this bright winter rest. So they can't stay in here. So where they go is up in the coolest room in the house. It's a spare bedroom that faces that way, yeah? So that's the most light I can give. It's probably not as much as they need, but it's the most I can give. So that's the best I can do. And the heating in that room is turned off. That doesn't mean to say the room gets cool. I mean, I leave the window open, and I think the lowest it got in there last winter, which wasn't a cold winter, it was quite a mild winter, was down to 11 degrees. Now, I'd like to get it lower than that, but that's weather dependent, you know. And if the sun does come in that window during the day, yes, they get their nice bright light, but sun through glass equals warmth, and the room starts to warm up. So it's not a perfect way to do the winter rest, but it's the best I can do. And depending on the weather through the winter, it will either work well or won't be quite as good as it could be. but I'm not in control of the weather. Right, Dendrobium senile, or senile as I call it. This plant needs that winter rest, bright, much drier and cool, or it won't bloom. Yeah, well, it's not going to get the chance this year. The plant is too weak and has not got a decent root system. So that stays where it is. I will grow that on through the winter, albeit slowly, but it's not getting rested. Right, what else have we got? As I say, I'll go through them one at a time. This is, in fact, all of them, I believe. Right, this is Dendrobium friedericksianum. Now, my winter rest last year didn't work in the main where it didn't work. It did work for quite a few of the orchids, but not for all of them. And this is one that it didn't work for. And I didn't start my winter rest until into the second week of January. That's far too late, because basically spring interrupted the rest period and it started getting warmer and the days got longer and they started to grow, and some of them didn't form buds. Now this one produced what I thought was going to be 2 flower buds, turned into 2 kikis, and there was a third one. They've since been taken off and potted up separately. But these large canes down here are not this year's, they're last year's, and they're good canes. Now they didn't bloom this spring, but they may well bloom next spring. And it's got some new growths pushing on. We'll see how that one does. I haven't got great hopes for that one, but you can but try. Right, what else have we got here? This one's growing quite nicely this year. Didn't grow very well last year, I must admit, but it's doing a lot better this year. And this is primulinum. Now this is an exception. This needs a bright, drier winter rest, but where it comes from, it doesn't get cold. So this needs a little bit more temperature than the others. So although it needs the winter rest, it doesn't want to be chilled. So that one stays here. That's not going upstairs. And this year I've got 3 reasonable canes going into winter, including one that's the largest of all the canes. Now, it didn't bloom last spring, but it did bloom the spring before. Right, where should we go now? Ones I can get at easiest, I suppose, and I hope the weight of this lot's not going to pull the fan off the roof. Let's do this one next. This one's got no tag on it, so I've forgotten what it is. I'll have to look it up. I'll put a pop up. But this really long cane here is not this year's growth. It's last year's. And believe it or not, it's still growing. You can see the growing tip is still growing new leaves. So this has got a more than 1 year cycle. It's got 1 new growth now. That new growth should already be at least 2 or 3 months into its growth pattern, and it's only just decided to put it out. I rested this one last year and it didn't do it any good at all as a plant. It basically nearly killed it, and that's why it's not got a very good root system yet, although it is putting up an effort now along with that single new growth. Now that one should be rested, and if I did, I would probably get blooms on that long cane. But for the sake of the plant, this year, no way. It's not healthy enough to go into a rest. So that one stays in the grow room too. And it'll have to sort itself out. It's as simple as that. Right, this one's next then. This is the really large Dendrobium anosmum that I got earlier this year. And because of where I got it from, a few people were a bit worried it might have fusarium, but it was checked and it didn't have. So it's grown 1 new cane this year, and I'm just going to put the camera down and come back with something that's going to frighten the life out of you. Okay, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to have to hold the camera with my left hand, which never works as well. It's always wobbly. But as you can see, this has grown 1 new cane and a really good new root system, much of which is attached, which is good news because it means the wires and the ties can come off eventually. It just looks neater without them. But behind that new cane are, coming from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 old canes. So the old canes greatly outnumber the new canes. Now, I've got no guarantee that those old canes, if rested, will or won't bloom. And I seriously suspect, I'm just changing hands again because I'm jabbering instead of doing what I planned on doing. These two canes, certainly this one, may well bloom. Yeah? This one may, but you can see as you progress towards the right-hand side of the plant, you start getting to effectively useless canes. That's no good to the plant whatsoever. It is the oldest one, and there are several cuts there where several more of the older canes were taken off when I got the plant. And I left it as a single rhizome progressing in this direction, and that's where it's pushed its new growth out. Right, changing hands again, we're going to do a little experiment. Oh, I'm going to need 2 hands, but you can see basically, no, I can get away with it. There. Got it. Now, what have I done? I've basically cut the rhizome through there. Now, I've got no guarantee I went right through and completely separated this part of the plant. But what I've done is seriously damaged the rhizome if I haven't quite separated it. And quite a few plants will react to that sort of rhizome damage by thinking it's lost the front end of the plant where the new growths and the blooms potentially come from, which is the continuation of the life of the plant. To reproduce, it has to produce blooms, and it produces its blooms in the main nearer the front end of the rhizome. So by cutting that rhizome or seriously damaging it there, I may get some new... Oh, I've obviously cut a few roots there. I'll live with that, it's got plenty. The idea being that it may shoot out from the back end of the plant. Now, that's not an attempt to create 2 plants, it's an attempt to push some new growths out from the back end to accompany the one single new cane that it's got. So, as far as next year is concerned, with a proper rest, this cane may bloom. It flipping well should. I mean, it's a pretty good strong cane. It's decided to push upwards and outwards slightly, and I'd have preferred it to go straight down, but I'm not going to try and bend it and force it. I mean, I could sort of strap it to the others and force it to go downwards. It's easier to accommodate if they hang straight down. They don't take up so much room. But, you know, this cane's still growing. Now, what I was saying about the growing season, we're past the halfway point. The longest day in the UK where I am is about just under 16.5 hours. That's a lot of daylight. And it's good for growing, you know. It's not the best light in the world in the UK, but on sunny days it's more than enough when we get them. We've had a lot of those this year. So quite honestly, in my opinion, this has been a good growing season so far, even if it did start early in the year, because we had a very dry, bright spring, and it kicked things off early this year. Nonetheless, this cane is, given the longest cane, about halfway, which, given the time of year, is about right. By the end of the month, we're going to be heading down towards 15 hours. From 16.5. It drops off dramatically. You know, that takes us into August. By the end of August, we'll be well down. And not too long after that, we're heading towards the 12-hour point. And then eventually we get to the 11-hour point, which is the cut-off, as far as I'm concerned, of my UK growing season. Once we get down below 11 hours, plants start to think, this isn't right. This is not what I'm used to. And so they slow up. Some of them almost stop. So that's the end of the growing season. That's towards the end of October time. So we've still got a good bit of growing season to go. And this one will carry on growing at this rate of knots. And this is a water and feed well. This one gets watered every single day. Now, some days when I water it, it's not bone dry. And other days, It's absolutely bone dry. It just depends on how warm it is in here. It's as simple as that. But I'm well pleased with the latest cane and its root system that it's pushed out, because when this plant arrived, it had recently been imported and all of the roots were ceremoniously chopped like a haircut straight across like that. So it had no new roots on it whatsoever. So I was a little worried, but then I thought, well, with the new growth it will grow new roots, and that's what it's done. So it's become predictable. But, you know, I mean, if you have a look at John Benedict's set of anosmums and the physical amount of new canes he's got on those multiple plants, boy, are we in for a show in the spring. I am really looking forward to that. It's a sight to see. Well, I may have some blooms on the older canes, and I hopefully should get some blooms on this one. But if I can get some new growths to kick off out of here, then that would be good as well. So that's Dendrobium anosmum. Beautiful blooms. But obviously it hasn't bloomed yet. I got it this year. So it hasn't had a chance yet. Now in the same vein, this is Dendrobium Nestor, which is an anosmum cross. So half of it is exactly the same as what you've just seen. Now when I got this plant, it was in bloom on this cane. And that was around March time last year, and it was already in bloom. I grew this cane throughout last year, quite a bit longer than the previous cane it bloomed on. So that's as good as the cane can get, I believe, in my care. But it only grew one, but I rested this through the winter, and this was a mass blooming the full length of this cane. It looked wonderful, and it got a first at the Orchid Society show as a consequence. Now this year we've got 3 canes. 2, one, this was the first one to emerge and it's the longest, hotly followed by this one, and then the trailer, this one came out a bit later, so it's a little bit shorter. Now again, if you look at the length of that longest cane and the length of the new growths, these are not going to be as long. I don't believe there's enough growing season left to achieve that length, but I have got 3 of them this time. And again, however large they get, that's as good as it's going to get. Again, this one gets watered every day. It's only just pushing out its new root system from these canes at this size. Yeah, it's only just creating a new root system, because some of these old roots are really going over now. But there's quite a few dendrobiums, these type, the winter rest type, that do actually lose their roots, or the majority of them, every single year, and they grow new ones. So that's how they grow. And you really don't need to worry that in the spring, when the new growths come, the root system looks naff, because that's how they go through the winter. And a lot of that is just their natural progression. It's the way they've evolved to actually go dormant in the winter effectively, and during that dormancy and the amount of dryness that they're subjected to, the roots don't do so well. But the plant knows it's going to recover a root system the following year, so it doesn't tend to worry about it. And quite honestly, the blooms that are produced on these type, they're produced from the strength of the previous growing season. Yeah, triggered by the winter rest, but the strength of the plant comes from how it was grown, or how well it grew the year before. So these are my blooms for next year on these canes. This one bloomed down the full length. That's its oldest cane. That won't bloom ever again. And this was in bloom when I got it over the full length of the cane. So I don't see any blooms liable from any of the older canes, only on these 3. But it will have to have the winter rest. I haven't tried it without to see if it would still work, but it's going to get one whether it likes it or not, because it worked last year with a partial rest and it bloomed well. So we'll see how that one does. But yeah, where possible I'll put pop-ups of those of these that have bloomed. Right, what does that leave then, this flipping thing? Okay, I think this is friedericksianum, isn't it? Yeah, friedericksianum. Now that's only just gone out of bloom. Well, can't put that on there, it's too heavy. This has only just gone out of bloom, and it bloomed well on these canes that grew last year. So this has got an annual cycle. But it's a strange one, because I'm not sure those blooms were triggered by the winter rest because of how late in the year they actually appeared. You know, those buds weren't forming in February, beginning of March, which is sort of as you come to the end of the rest period. That's not when they formed. They formed later, quite a bit later in fact. So if this one needs the drier, bright winter rest with some coolness, I think that's just because it's where it comes from. And it may not be essential, but it can do no harm. It did go up in that room last year. The plant survived, it did okay. And this year it's growing some pretty good new growths. You know, there's one down here and this lot up here. And again, that was a, you know, that got a first, I believe. Yes, that got a first at the Orchid Society when it was in bloom earlier in the year. So I'm not sure the blooms are triggered by the rest, but it can't do any harm because it bloomed well, having had a partial winter rest. So this year it's going to get a proper one. And who knows, that might induce the blooms earlier in the year. In other words, you know, this year's blooming may have been as a consequence of not starting the winter rest early enough. Yeah, and by the time the plant had triggered that it was having its rest, spring arrived. So although it still carried on and bloomed, those blooms were later than perhaps they should have been. So maybe next year they'll be a bit earlier, but that one's going up. I'm running out of places to chuck things at the moment. You can go there for a minute. I'm actually going to water these in a minute, so you know, the fact that they're down is a bonus. Saves getting them down. Right, these are the other two, and both of those will get rested. They've already been filmed. They were in when I was doing it by the lower classifications. So these were the I've forgotten what they're flipping called now, but those two have already been done. But both of those will go up. If they don't get a good rest with the cooler temperatures, they're not likely to bloom. So those two have got to be done. Okay, so that's those. That's the ones that should rest that are not getting a rest, and why. Like, you know, the senile or senile. It's too weak. Don't risk it. I lost my good one last year through putting it into a rest, you know, when it was just too weak. So it's not going to get one this year. So there we go. There are others that like to cool down in the winter, but strictly speaking don't need that true rest. They just need lower temperatures and a massive reduction in watering and feeding. Well, they're going to get that anyway in here. It's going to cool down in the winter in here. It just is. And in the case of those on that list, they've already continued blooming year on, you know, just by leaving them in the grow room and giving them that treatment. So I see no reason whatsoever to change it. Now, these that are going to get fully rested, when I set these up, it's quite a way away. I don't know why I'm talking about it yet. You know, this is, you know, and it'll be the beginning of December when I actually do this. But when I actually go and set them up for their winter rest and everything, obviously that will be a separate video, and you know, I'll go over it again. But those are the ones that are going to get done anyway. So I'm sure there's quite a few that I've got on this list that nobody else has got that watches. I have got quite a large collection of dendrobiums, there's no doubt about it. Just as a matter of interest, this is not dendrobium related, but because I've been spraying the mounts a lot, I've not been looking at them as well as I perhaps should. That's my Orangus thing. I've forgotten what it is, and it's the one without the tag, so I should have memorised that by now, and I must get a tag. But that's got 3 nice spikes on it. And one of them, the first one to form, which is also the shortest, has got buds showing. Little green tips on the kinks. So that's obviously what it does. It grows the spike, and when it's grown as much as it wants to, the buds form on the nodes, and at that point it seems to get like a zigzag shape to it. But the other two are still growing on at the moment. But yeah, 3 spikes on that little plant. Well pleased with that. Nothing to do with dendrobiums. Right, okay, that's the dendrobium set finished. Thanks for watching, and hope you picked up some tips. You may disagree with some of what I'm going to do or have done, but as I've always said, this is what I do with my plants in my grow room, and in the main it works. Sometimes it's an experiment, like cutting that rhizome, and that may not work. Might even generate an infection in the blinking plant, but it shouldn't do. Sterilised tools and all that. And hopefully that will trigger some new growth farther back on the plant. We'll see how we go. May have no effect at all. But that part of the plant was coming off anyway. Yeah? There's too many old canes on that plant. So it was going to be cut there at some point, and I thought by cutting it, and I got a feeling that cut that I made didn't go right through, so the plant will see that as some serious damage and may respond accordingly. But at some point it was going to get cut there anyway, and probably I'd have discarded the back of the plant. But by just leaving it on the mount at the moment, it may produce a new growth or two. We shall see how we go. Right, thanks for watching then. See you again next time. But I missed one. Now this is my Dendrobium anosmum semi-alba, and it has bloomed for me, but it's never grown well. It's always been a weak plant. And when I put this into the winter rest last year, 1, I shouldn't have done, and 2, I thought I'd killed it. But as I brought the plants back down into the grow room, I saw one little tiny point of growth on one of the canes, which at the time I thought is probably a bud. But it turned out to be a kiki, and since then it's grown some more. Yeah, and that's all it's done this year, has pushed out kikis. It's got no new growth at the base and no new roots. So irrespective of what's supposed to happen to this plant, this one is staying put in the grow room. Now I don't know whether at some point in this growing season it's going to try and put some new growth up at the base. But I thought I'd lost the plant anyway, so this is a bonus. And at the very worst, I've got 3 kikis to plant up and grow on. But you know, you're looking at 3, maybe even 4 years before they get to blooming size. So you know, I've lost the ability to bloom this plant for some time now, and that was as a direct consequence of resting a plant that was far too weak. I should have grown it on and just ignored the seasons, just keep it going. And that's certainly what I'll be doing this year, but I don't know at what stage I'm going to take these kikis off. I mean, certainly this one by my little finger here, that's got sufficient roots to maintain that little kiki, and its leaves are open. Now, this one's not too far behind, and although this one's smaller, it's got some viable roots and some leaves. I don't know whether that one's actually going to make it or not, but it means that there's some life in those canes of some sort, but the plant is responding to its weak state and its lack of new roots by producing kikis. And I would suggest with this plant, that's desperation. That's because the plant thinks it's lost all hope here, so the only way of continuing it is to produce kikis and hope that they can get a hold somewhere or whatever. But it shouldn't be doing that, basically. I mean, anosmum types do grow kikis, don't get me wrong, but they should also be pushing new growths out at the base at the same time. They shouldn't be totally dependent on kikis. That's not natural for them. So anyway, this one needs a drier, brighter winter rest or it won't bloom. Well, blooms or not, I don't care. What I've got to do is try and look after the plant. The plant as a species in my grow room is not lost because I have kikis, but that will mean I'm a hell of a long way from blooming, and the only chance of getting this plant back to blooming again is for new growths to come out here, or even a single new growth, because then it will produce a new root system. But that since I got that plant, it's never been a happy plant. It's never done well for me. But maybe I can push the kikis on and get them to do well for me. It's like starting again, really. And time and effort will have to be put in to get that to a blooming sized plant. Or 3 plants, as it happens, in the same pot. I would probably pot those as their kikis. Yeah? And then mount them at a later date, possibly next spring, something like that. But yet to be decided. So anyway, just a little add-on. And as I said, I've got to do a little bit of homework on glomeratum. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure, I'm almost 95% certain that that is a dry, bright winter rest, or drier, brighter winter rest, with some cool. So it's probably going to go upstairs. It's certainly a strong enough plant to do so. And then maybe it will bloom again. We'll see. Bye for now.